I'm David Sandbeck with Minnesota Spectator News, a report by Glenn Thrush. I'll jump right into it. Joseph R. Biden, during the 2008 campaign, of course, was sworn in as vice president. Barack Obama had assured Mr. Biden that he would be consulted on every major decision. But many on the new president's team were still Biden skeptical, as they should be, and Mr. Obama was not sure the meandering former senator had the discipline to be an effective governing partner. People close to both men had said. So during a private lunch, February 2009, Mr. Biden slid a memo across the table to Mr. Obama outlining the role to erase those doubts. Quarterbacking the implementation of the $787 billion economic stimulus that had been rammed through Congress a few days earlier in the depths of a looming recession. Sounds good to me, said Mr. Obama, barely glancing at the memo, according to two people familiar with the exchange. Mr. Obama was already pivoting to healthcare reform, so why not exchange Mr. Biden? As it turned out, Mr. Biden's work on the rollout, implementation, and oversight and selling of the 2009 stimulus, officially the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, was the most sustained and perhaps most significant assignment of his time in office. Speaking of Joe Biden. And then 11 years later, in an election seasoned, defined by pandemic, economic collapse, and far larger relief package, Mr. Biden's campaign is hoping to leverage his stewardship of the 2009 stimulus as a point of contrast with President Trump. I'll just stop here. The contrast. Again, they bailed out the plutocrats. They left Main Street high and dry. They didn't do cram downs to help alleviate the mortgage crisis. They kicked 5 million Americans out of their home. Yeah, so let's talk about how that was mismanaged as a selling point for Biden. All right, let's get back into the story. As a point of contrast with President Trump, whose White House is pushing back at the congressional oversight of $2.7 trillion in new spending, even as a host of problems has emerged, especially chaos in the small business loan program. The central question of this election will be who can dig us out of a historic economic hole, so his leadership of the Recovery Act should be his core resume selling point, said David Plouffe, Mr. Obama's top political advisor and Biden surrogate. That's not a good point of contrast because, as I pointed out, the American people never really recovered. So let's continue with the story. The examination of that critical 2-year period drawn from interviews with 30 people involved in the effort offers a glimpse of what Mr. Biden's strengths as a manager, his enthusiasm, focus on detail, and knack for leading a first-rate team that moved the money out quickly and minimized waste and fraud. What nonsense. They moved the money out quickly for the plutocracy and the big banks. To hell with the little people like us, the common people. That's what they did, and that's what they're doing again. So, all right, let's continue. It was one big competence test, and Mr. Biden aced it. His longtime lieutenant, Ron Klan, said in an interview. Let's skip some of this and get to some of the story. All right. But the stimulus says more about the kind of vice president Mr. Biden was than about the kind of president he would be. Well, he became the expediter-in-chief and offered Mr. Obama advice and tactical suggestions. He made none of the major strategic calls about the size and the composition of the program, aides said. Nor did he seriously push Mr. Obama, as now he's pressuring Mr. Trump, to fight for a bigger funding package. even though former officials said he conceded the stimulus was probably too small. By the way, they didn't do a second round of stimulus, so they knew it was too small. They knew it was pandering to plutocracy. It was bailing out the big banks or throwing millions of people out on the street. They knew it was too small, okay? And they still would not do another round of stimulus later on. So you and me, the common people, we never really recovered, and this new economic apocalypse, this new economic Armageddon, we're going to put this guy in charge again. Oh, it's just distorted. Let's move on to some other part of the deal here. So here we go. One of the stimulus checks bearing President Trump's name that are meant to assist Americans during the coronavirus crisis. And about that, I'd like to interrupt. Our Democratic leadership, who I call the rancid Pelosi, opposed giving direct cash assistance to people, which is the most effective type of support we need right now. She opposed it. She opposed it. We finally got it done, but she initially opposed it. So that's the kind of leadership we have. So let's skip ahead here. There was nothing ambiguous, though, about the impact of the stimulus on Mr. Biden's political fortunes. It sort of made him, to be honest, in the eyes of the Obama people, said Ray LaHood, a former Republican congressman who served as Mr. Obama's transportation secretary, a Republican who served as Mr. Obama's transportation secretary. We can talk about that another time. Mr. Obama picked Mr. Biden in part because he viewed him as a past tense presidential aspirant. It's not so past tense now. Yet, if overseeing the stimulus proved Mr. Biden was a team player, his pursuit of the assignment, and he wanted it badly, was also a sign that he had never entirely abandoned his own political ambitions in the end. The stimulus catalyzed his emergence as Mr. Obama's trusted partner and eventually set him up as a presidential contender. Again, the TARP program was a total heist, and the rich got richer, the big banks got bigger, and we're in worse shape now. So if that's the litmus test, looking at the results, Biden failed. So let's talk more and continue reading the story. Mr. Biden mentioned the stimulus only in passing on the 2020 trail, probably good political instinct, when there was a trail, and was only recently begun invoking it as a campaign theme. There is a broad agreement that the program had a positive impact on the economy in freefall, with the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office concluding that it created between 2 million and 4.8 million full-time jobs. We could have done so much better. We should have focused on people. We should have kept people in homes. We should have allowed people to restructure their mortgage as a systematic thing instead of individual case-by-case bases that was favoring the banks. And the banks had a distorted incentive to foreclose. And this was done under the Obama and Joe Biden leadership. So I'm mad as hell about what happened 12 years ago, and I'm up in arms about the heist that's happening now. So I look at that as the Pelosi scheme 12 years ago. We have a new Pelosi scheme now. These, our Democratic leaders have significant leverage that they deliberately sacrifice so that they can do the bidding of the donor class and shirk their responsibility to the common people, you and I. All right, let's see. I think that's enough of that story. Thank you for watching Minnesota Spectator News with David Sandbeck.